Hello and welcome to Riz On, my podcast. I decided to make some Chicago Cubs podcasts for no other reason than I have some free time here and there. So instead of talking to the wall, I'll talk to my computer and maybe some people will listen. I first will give a little bit of background on myself as a Cubs fan. Then I'll go into what my thoughts are on the 2016 season thus far. Okay, starting off. I became a Cubs fan about the age of about 13. I was in eighth grade. Um, I live in Florida, and so at that time, the Braves were in the middle of their fucking run. Most of my friends were Braves fans. Almost every game was on TBS. So I really had two choices growing up: either be a Braves fan or flip it on the WGN and become a Cubs fan. And that's exactly what I wound up doing. I turned it on WGN one day. I just started getting into baseball. I was a fan probably right around the time the strike happened is when I started paying attention to baseball really, or started to understand it. And then in '95, I can remember watching the World Series with the Braves and Indians and just watching Maddox carve up that lineup. And then so in '95-ish, '96, beginning of the season is when I really became a Cubs fan because I started watching them and I was like, what is with this team? Like, what's the attraction? I knew a little bit of background, how they had a big fan base, and they hadn't won a World Series in a very long time. I guess at that point it would have been 88 years. And I instantly just kind of fell in love, not, to sound cheesy, between the fucking Ivy, Harry Carey's ridiculous personality, the fact that the fans continued to fill the ballpark even though the team sucked. Um, and there's some players I liked. I like Grace. Soso had that 30-30 gold chain that he rocked because he actually used to steal bases back then. Um, fucking Henry Rodriguez, fucking O. Henry bars getting chucked on the field. And I don't know, it was just hard not to like that team. And also, I just didn't want to be like my friends at the time that loved the Braves. And so from there, I was hooked. And to go through a quick timeline from then till now, I can recall in '98 when Kerry Wood was called up, big right-hander from Texas. I mean, that term's been uttered before for many power pitchers, Nolan Ryan, Roger Clemens, and I can recall it was like his fifth start of his career, against the Astros. It was on WGN. Struck out 20 Astros, and his slider looked like a fucking frisbee that day. I was 16 at that time, and it was just unworldly. And the hit he gave up was debatable. It was like an infield, almost like an infield single. It was ridiculous. And I'm trying to remember, I think, God, I want to say it was like Franklin Gutierrez or someone like shitty like that who got that one hit. One of the most dominating performances of all time, that goes without saying. And so now I'm like, all right, it's my first playoff experience with the Cubs because between Kerry Wood's emergence that year and Sosa, knocking 66 home runs that year, they did make it to the playoffs, and they abruptly and promptly got swept by the Braves, who were still in the middle of their wannabe dynasty. And then the next year, I was excited until Kerry Wood had to have Tommy John surgery. And then fast forward a couple years, 2001, that was my first Cubs game I ever attended, which was against the Braves at Turner Field. And I don't remember the score. I can't tell you who pitched for the Cubs that day. I know Maddox was on the mound for the Braves, but there's one thing I'll never forget, and that's Sammy Sosa and his, fucking PED glory days, just fucking turning on a Maddox pitch, and it is the loudest hit ball I've ever heard. It went off the batter's eye in center field at Turner, and any baseball fan that's watched a Braves game or is aware of that ballpark's dynamics, it's a pitcher's ballpark, and that batter's eye is probably close to 450 feet away, and he hit the top of it, so it could have easily been upwards of 475 feet. It's ridiculous. The Cubs did wind up winning. I don't remember the score, but they did win. And fast forward a couple years after that, 2003, Dusty Baker was hired. The previous year, he had managed the Giants to the World Series, and fucking managed them out of a trophy, quite frankly, with his horrible bullpen usage and keeping Russ Ortiz in the game. But anyways, I was still excited for a high-profile manager to take over because prior to him, I think it was Riggleman, who was basically a nobody, which you don't have to be somebody to be a great manager. But anyways, so Dusty takes over. He brings his enthusiasm. He still doesn't really know how to manage a fucking bullpen or how to put guys with OBP at the top of the lineup. He's throwing out Nephew Perez in the leadoff spot with like a 290 OBP, throwing out Corey Patterson, even though he can't fucking get on base. But anyway, somehow in 03, they managed to make the playoffs, of course. And Bartman happens, which was obviously pretty devastating. They were just a couple outs away from going to the World Series, and I wholeheartedly believe had they gone to the World Series, they would have done what the Marlins did to the Yankees that year in the World Series, and the drought would be over. It would have been over after 95 years in 2003. But we all know what happened. Some guy with a turtleneck reached for the ball and old piss hands, a.k.a. Moises Alou. If you didn't know, he used to pee on his hands before each game. Not before each game, but often to like keep his hands rough because he didn't wear batting gloves. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. Pee stories aside, the next season in 04, they had a good squad. Most of the team returned, and they had an addition of Derek Lee, and Aramis Ramirez was still there from the trade they got from the Pirates in 03. And they were pretty good from start to finish, and they faded, but they faded a little down the stretch. They picked up Nomar. 04 was actually the first and only time I've been to Wrigley. They played the Padres. It was a high-scoring game. I know the Cubs lost, but Lee hit a home run. Nomar had a home run. I think Brian Giles not Brian Giles. So whoever was the bigger one. Yeah, it was Brian Giles. I think Marcus was the small one. Yeah, so Brian Giles hit a dong. Wrigley was awesome, and that was when they had nets holding up falling rocks. But it was still great. And then 05, losing season. Derek Lee had an MVP caliber year that season. Battled for the Triple Crown, except he was never going to get it because, as I said previously, Dusty Baker didn't know how to put OBP guys at the top of the lineup. So despite Derek Lee hitting like 320 or 330 with 30 to 40 home runs, I don't even think he cracked 100 RBIs, which was a joke. But that's neither here nor there. 06 was a losing campaign, and then Dusty was let go. In 07, they make another high-profile managerial hire, and they get Lou Piniella. Hey there, Lou Piniella, something. Delilah remix. Anyways, Lou Piniella, I liked his antics. They were quite amusing. But excuse me for that 1 second. He made an impact in year one, just like Dusty did, and they went to the playoffs again. They did it on the arms of Big Z, and Wood was still around, and Derek Lee and Ramos Ramirez were still kind of holding on to their primes. But they kind of came out of nowhere that year. I remember around the All-Star break, they were in the middle of the pack, and they kind of went on a run. They made the playoffs. I knew they wouldn't be a serious threat. I think they got swept. It was either by the D-backs or Dodgers. I can't recall. One of those teams swept them. In the following year, they were supposed to have a better squad, and they did. I remember that was like Marmal's coming out party. I remember that was before he, forgot how to throw strikes. He was awesome. Ramirez and Lee were still getting it done. Fukudome, or Fuck You Do Me, was on the team that year. He wasn't very good, but he had maybe the greatest name in the history of baseball. And they made the playoffs as well, and they got swept in the first round by the Dodgers or D-backs. I can't remember which year the Dodgers and D-backs beat the Cubs, but it was back-to-back years those two teams knocked them out. And then in 09, you could tell it was kind of coming apart. You could see the window was falling. They had players that were aging. Big Z was not being as effective. And I believe they had a winning record in 09, but not by much. And then after that, it was kind of like, okay, here comes the shitstorm, or here comes the dark days. 2010, losing season. The only bright spot that season was Starlin Castro's Major League debut. He had 200 hits his rookie year. 2011, much of the same. That's about the only thing you wanted to watch, was see what the young Starlin Castro could do. There wasn't much else really to look at. It's hard for me to even remember the starting pitchers off those teams. It's just like try to erase it from my memory. And then the winter following the 2011 season, the Cubs and new owner Tim Ricketts and the Ricketts family, who actually I think it became owners in 2010, so I think this is their second year as owners, they make quite possibly the best hire they can make. And they hired Theo Epstein, or Epstein. I'm not really sure how to pronounce it, which is sad. I've heard his name a million times. Anyway, I'm just going to refer to him as Theo from now on. Theo, any baseball fan knows his history. Youngest GM in the sport back when the Red Sox broke their curse. I think he has an economics degree from Yale or some shit like that. Just one smart motherfucker that knows how to build a franchise. So that was a huge turning point in the history of the Cubs. Not that there's been much time since he's been hired, but you get my point. Big things were on the horizon, but he preached patience the day he got there. He all but said, "Hey, Cubs fans, don't fucking expect shit. We're going to suck dick for the next few years." He could have said that. I would have been fine with it, but he pretty much said, "Be patient." And sure as shit, it felt like the day after he was hired as president of baseball operations, he made the trade for Rizzo. It seemed like it was the next day. It wasn't. I can't remember exactly, but it was one of his immediate moves. Traded Cashner, which at first I was like, "Oh man, is a young gun, I hope that doesn't come back to bite him." And well, as you can see the name of my podcast, it hasn't. So I was excited to see Rizzo. In my years as a Cubs fan, I've never really seen them have a power hitting lefty first baseman. They had Lee with good years, but he's right-handed. Mark Grace was a lefty, but he didn't have much power. He was more of an extra base hit, high average guy. So even though I didn't know much about Rizzo, I was excited to see what he could do. And so the first year under Theo on the field, they of course sucked again. I mean, they're pretty much beginning full tank mode at that point. And the only reason to watch that team, in all honesty, was Rizzo and Castro. Castro is still getting his 200 hits, and Rizzo, I think, made his debut with the Cubs in like May some point, and he went on to hit like 20 home runs the rest of the season with a solid average. So you thought, okay, we have pieces now. This Rizzo guy can probably hit 30, and Castro's good offensive shortstop, at least at the time. And the following year, of course, another tank year. And it is even worse to watch that year because Rizzo and Castro actually had down years. It was not fun to watch. Fast forwarding to the following year, 2014. But before I do, let me go back to 13. They made a key acquisition that year, as diehard Cubs fans know, and hell, at this point, most general baseball fans know. That's the year they acquired Arrieta for, I think it was Clevenger and I want to say Scott Feldman, or some shitty ass fucking pitcher. Anyway, so 14 starts, still not expecting anything. And they were at least watchable for a time that season. I mean, Rizzo went to the All-Star game, Castro did, Hamill and Samardzija had good first halves, and then they were traded, but they were traded for Addison Russell, who's the current shortstop, and probably so for the next 5 to 10 years, and Billy McKinney, who's a decent prospect. He's an outfielder. And then at the end of the season, it was like, all right, is it, they got some players that had good years. Do they pick it up? And so they had some pieces going forward. Arrieta's 14, which actually went kind of under the radar. He was injured coming out of spring training, so he didn't make his first start till the end of May, so he only made about 20, 25 starts. But his ERA was on 2.5, and all his peripheral numbers were like exceptional. Like they matched up with Kershaw, Mad Bum, and those type of pitchers' peripheral numbers. So going into 15, they of course make a big splash and sign John Lester to a huge contract. So now I'm like, all right, they're starting to get serious. They see the window opening. Now you got Lester, assuming Arrieta can, piggyback off what he did in 14. Bryant, who's been waiting in the wings for a couple seasons now. He was drafted in 13. He's going to be up within a week or two. Schwarber could be up in the summertime. They brought Hamill back, who's not great, but you thought, okay, 15 is going to be at least a competitive year. I wasn't expecting a ton, but I thought maybe 500 was a possibility. And then the season starts, and they're kind of up, down, up, down. Lester's kind of a roller coaster his first couple months. Arrieta, same deal. Bryant comes up. He's showing why they drafted him. Rizzo's having a good year. And then around June, Schwarber comes up just mashing the ball. Then about that time, that's when Arrieta starts his historic run. Lester starting to pitch more consistently. And then they get no hit by Cole Hamels. And that was the turning point because at that point they were around 500, maybe a couple games over in the wild card hunt. From that point on, they just went on a fucking tear. And obviously, they made the playoffs. Arrieta did what he does and shut down the Pirates. And then in the next series versus the Cardinals, I thought, okay, this is where it comes to an end. It's the Cardinals. It's the Cardinals. They don't lose to the fucking Cubs. And lo and behold, the Cubs just mashed the fuck out of the ball. Just Schwarber crushing them, fucking Rizzo, just cranking home runs off the Cards pitching. I think the Cards were kind of out of gas at that point between injuries, the stress of the 100 wins and keeping the Pirates at bay and the Cubs at bay might have caught up to them. So they move on to the NLCS, and I can't believe it. My Cubs are fucking in the NLCS, and they beat the Cardinals to get there. Like, holy fucking shit. But of course, they ran into the Mets pitching staff, which completely dominated them. And now that gets me into the 2016 season and what I think thus far. So far, quite obviously, it's been ridiculously good. Like, I can't remember a season being this good. And the only other time I can remember being that good or close to as good as they've been this year is 08. They're pretty much wire-to-wire division champs that year. But even still, this year just takes it to the next level. I mean, from the very first game of the year, turning on ESPN, watching them play the Angels suck. I know that, but they just completely dominated them the whole series. Then in the next series, they took 3 or 4 from the D-backs, who I know suck too. But just the fashion, they're just beating teams down. I mean, this is baseball. This isn't football or basketball where the best teams have huge margin of victories every night. But the Cubs are just winning by 4 and 5 runs a game. But even still, I was like, let's pump the brakes. I know they're going to be good this year, but let's just see how good. Small sample size. Well, they've continued it throughout the whole fucking year. I mean, the rotation has an ERA of 2.35 at this point. They're 41 and 17. They're on pace for about 113 wins for the season. Their run differential is about 145. The second best team, the Red Sox, run differential is about plus 70. So it's a huge gap there. They've had 20-something victories by 5 runs or more. And in about 80% of their losses have been by 2 runs or less. Like, they've just been fucking insane. Going forward, I think they need to address left field. They've gotten virtually no production out of that. Of course, Schwarber going down the 3rd game of the year didn't help that. Now Solaire's out. Not that he was doing a whole lot. He was heating up a little bit before he got hurt. And so I'm not sure what they're going to do, if anything at all. I mean, they've scored the 3rd most runs in the majors, but Theo and the general manager, Jed Hoyer, said this team's in win-now mode. So I expect them to make some move if they can. And then in right field, Hayward's done nothing offensively. Not that he's going anywhere, but it makes their record, their hot start, even more ridiculous. I also like to see them, this is probably the number 1 priority, is get bullpen help. Not that the bullpen's been terrible, it's actually been solid, but if Andrew Miller's available, you better go after him, because right now Travis Wood and Clayton Richard as the lefty specialist aren't getting it done. First of all, their lefty splits aren't even that great. So they could get an elite reliever in Miller and probably the best left-handed reliever in the game right now, with all due respect to Chapman. Other than that, I'd like to see him get a young arm, not just for this year, but long-term, because that's the one thing they're missing is a young power arm. They have all the young positional players. There's about 6 or 7 of them lined up, with Schwarber, Soler, and Hayward, and Bryant, and Russell, and Rizzo. But they don't have that 25-year-old stud like a Jose or a Strasburg or Syndergaard or DeGrom. So I'm not sure who they could get. I thought maybe they could go after one of the Indians' aces, but they're in first place. I don't see that happening. Sonny Gray's been rumored, but he doesn't excite me that much, honestly. Tyson Ross was a possibility last year, but this year he's been hurt. So I'm not really sure what they can do. Um, I'd be satisfied if they just got Miller, honestly. I mean, that kind of goes without saying. But I'm super excited about this year. Obviously, I'm curious to see uh, what guys they do pick up when the deadline gets closer. Um, and I'm just going to try and watch as many games as I can this year. You know, when they suck, I still watch games. It's more of like every now and again because I just don't want to put myself through the torture. When I was younger, I used to do that. Now it's just not worth my time. Not that I'm a fair weather fan. Even when they suck, I keep track, check the standings, see how the farm system's doing. But I'm not watching fucking 120 games when they're losing, you know, 2/3 of them. It's just not putting myself through that at this point. Got better shit to do. But when they're good like this, I'm not going to take it for granted, which is more the reason why I'm going to watch. Um, but I'm even more, I guess, concerned about the playoffs. They can win 130 games. It's not going to fucking matter if they can't win the World Series. I'm not going to be pissed if they don't because what team is guaranteed the World Series? The playoffs is a crapshoot. Rarely does the team with the best record win the World Series, at least in recent history that I can recall. So the point is to give your team enough at bats, quote unquote, aka chances in the playoffs, and eventually you like to think they come in with one. So they have probably another 3 to 5 year window to get it done. But I don't want to wait anymore. I've been a fan 21 years. I know there's other Cub fans that have waited twice, if not 3 times as long. They have a legit chance to win it this year. So I'm gonna go ahead and rely on Theo to get it done. And Theo we trust. If he can make some splashes, he will. So just see what happens. Um, keep watching, keep keeping track, and well, I guess I'm gonna wrap it up. I think I've rambled on long enough. And with that being said, go Cubs, go, and I'll see you around.